Hello and welcome to episode 278 of the Thursday Night Podcast. The name's Brady, joined as always by David, and we've got a win to talk about on the basketball side this week, which I honestly forgot about just the timing and everything. As I was prepping, I was going through, just started with the Arizona State game that happened this week. Forgot that there is a win against Fort Valley State for the men's basketball team last week, so we will get to that off the top. We will continue on to their loss at the Sun Devils, which is maybe not as discouraging as feared. Georgia State, a healthy 2-0 against the spread versus Big 12 teams this season. So, little something there. We will get to the women's as well, who lost 2 games since we've last talked to you guys by a combined 5 points. So, about as tough a week as you can take without getting the victory. Then football hits the road, first of 2 to end the regular season, which will be the end of Georgia State's season as they sit at 1-9. And some quarterback roster news that may or may not have caught your eye over the course of the week that obviously reframes the last 2 games, reframes the season as a whole. We'll get to all of that and more, but first, Georgia State 90, Fort Valley State 56. The Panthers get off the schneid to start the season. Granted, still not against a Division I opponent, and
at this rate, we'll take it.
Yeah, we're unfortunately having to do a lot of qualifiers for wins in Georgia State athletics so far this athletic year. It's not been great, but they get this one pretty much no fuss. It was 50-26 at halftime. Tied the record under Jonas Hayes with 16 made three-pointers on the night. And it was a share of guys. You can see if you're watching this, the box score that Mike Tucker, 4 of 7 from 3. Malachi Brown, 4 of 9 from 3. Ja'Kai Newton, 3 of 8 from 3. Joey Chappelle, 3 of 4 from 3. Ayuba Bertha, 2 of 5 from 3. So not only did you get 16, but it was a balanced effort. And all of this without your top scorer, your top three-point shooter, Jelani Hamilton, who missed these last 2 games, still lingering injury. Maybe not too long-term, but they're certainly being cautious there, and he has not played since exiting as Presbyterian. But in this one, not that this was going to be the game that you slipped up because you didn't have him, but no issues there. Holding Fort Valley State, who had some sweet script Fort Valley jerseys, I should say. It's a really nice uniform look from the D2 unit. They shoot 27% from the floor, 6 of 20 from 3. Georgia State wins on the glass 52-33. So the turnovers and some turnovers against the press, which obviously will continue to be a theme as we go to the other game Georgia State played, were still kind of an issue here. And the defense was better in the second half than the first as far as just like the energy from my viewpoint. But obviously not a lot to complain about here when you win a game by 30+. And it's never really in doubt. You're pretty comfortably ahead for a good stretch of the 40 minutes, and you get a win, which definitely cannot take for granted if you've been watching this team. You cannot count these 2 short.
You certainly can't take this one for granted, unfortunately, because I feel like in pods past, we certainly wouldn't spend too much time on this, and we probably won't, but at the same time, given where the team has been, we've needed to see a performance out of Micah Tucker, like this. Ja'Kai Newton, obviously Malachi Brown finally getting back to what we think that he can do. That will certainly help moving forwards, but this was a better game from them, and I really do hope that there's something that can be taken away from this. I know we'll talk about Arizona State in a second, but a lot of what that game can teach you are things that this game can teach you in the same kind of vein. We talk about how Georgia State plays some of these tougher opponents, and there are things that you can install even if, every single shot isn't falling. But that's just how basketball works. You can have a game where you're playing somebody close, and Georgia State didn't play Fort Valley State close. And that I can't remember what the game was last year, but there was this very similar, type opponent that Georgia State, it made it seem like Georgia State was playing them a lot closer in one half than they should have been. And this doesn't seem like it they did not repeat that here, which was good. That's what you want to see. These are the types of games that you want to see the Georgia States, blowing out. I regularly remember them fighting to try to get 100, in games like this 5 years ago, 10 years ago, so good on them for, having a good day. You would love to get the turnovers, down. You would love to keep guys from almost fouling out against this type of opponent. Christian Beam is the weirdest basketball player I've ever seen, in a good way. And he's just raw. He's just very raw.
If you were hoping this would maybe be a game he gets you like 10-8, and it's like, yeah, this will progress, and you build on this, and you didn't really get that. He's 3-5, and the truth of it is he's just not really looking to score whenever he gets the ball on offense. And I think some of that's okay, because I think as we've gone through, he isn't going to be the focal point of your offense. You're hoping for when he's taking shots, he's making shots from him, and it's going to be a lot lower percentage of the offense than a lot of these other guys, even when you have Jelani out. Like, you're not looking for Christian to be the one making up the production there, and it's going to be a progress for him. It's going to be, process over really probably most of the season, especially as he's playing more than expected, because Clash Peters, we're still not, I think, expecting back at this point. Just, you don't usually see players come back from this extended of an absence that started before the season even began, so it'd be hard to see even when he comes back how you'd get him up to speed because he's been out for so long. So still don't know what's going on there, but this is going to be a lot more of Christian Beam's front court than maybe we expected in the preseason, and so you're going to have to hope you see what you can from him week to week and just getting better and better. But if you were hoping to see it really come together your offensive end, this felt like a game it could happen, but it didn't. But the guy that you did see more from, as far as just like taking command in the offense, was Ja'Kai Newton, who, as I was watching the beginning of this game, where I think he had 8 of his 13 points basically in the first, like before the first media timeout or before halfway through the first half. Like, he hit the ground running in this one, and then it slowed down a little bit. But it felt like he needed a game like this where, even with Jelani out, maybe is a benefit to him, that he was a lot more in charge of things. He was looking for his jump shot, and between this one, he's 4 of 13, 3 of 8 from 3 in this game, and not to jump ahead to Arizona State yet, but in that one, he was 3 of 14, shooting 0 of 5 from 3. It is a lot more volume scorer than he's efficient, and he's like leading the way on offense, but I think you had to expect that it was going to be a bit of a growing process for him as well, getting back into game speed. And so I think you like that a game like this can happen, that not particularly efficient, and they win comfortably, and then the same where not that efficient against Arizona State, but it's not a reason you point to that they lost the game, and offense certainly in stretches in that game was pretty good as a whole. So these are still, like, if you're hitting Sunbelt play and he has worked through and gotten a lot of time playing and has gotten more comfortable offensively and is finding his spots on the floor, that will be a benefit for this team over that course of games. That could be what non-conference is about for Ja'Kai Newton.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
That's totally fine. Just getting him specifically to get those legs underneath him. As we said last week, you can definitely see the gears turning. It's just about the reps at this point right now.
But kind of blending the games together, in this one, Micah Tucker is leading scorer. We keep I don't want to just be a broken record, but I just come away very impressed with the strides he has already taken. And for what we've said about this staff now going into year 4, where young guys, if they've had roles, it's felt very inconsistent. It's been very unlikely you're seeing freshmen out there for long stretches of time. You see little spurts. This is like the best the freshmen have looked in a Jonas Hayes season. And you see that in this game. Obviously, Fort Valley State, not the barometer, but you still like to see a guy who's a freshman go out there, score 18 points to lead the team. 2 assists, 2 turnovers, not super ideal. And like we said, there's still issues to get worked out there as far as just some of the sloppy turnovers that you're getting. We know Jelani's out, and so that's going to mean that there's a lot more lineups at a given notice in any game where Malachi and Micah are going to be out there. And I think that makes the burden higher, that you need to cut out the turnovers. Because if you're having a turnover problem when both of your point guards are on the field, on the court a good bit, that's an issue. Like, because if you've got 2 point guards out there, that should theoretically be your most trusty lineup as far as taking control of the basketball. But even in this one against Fort Valley State, there were some issues there, and obviously that bleeded into the second half against Arizona State as well, where I don't know if you have any more. We can quickly transition, change over the box scores real quick. Shout out Stad Podcast as ever for some great presentations of the stats. And Monday night, they head to Tempe, play their second Big 12 opponent in as many weeks, and they lead 39-34 at the half against Arizona State on the road. It goes downhill in the second half. There is a 20-1 run for Arizona State over the course of like the middle of the second half. Flips a Georgia State double-digit lead to a 9-point lead for Arizona State. The Sun Devils take it home from there, end up winning 75-62. But as I was just talking about the last one, Micah Tucker, 11 points, 2 of 4 from 3. He hit 2 threes in the second half to stretch the lead to the largest that it would get in the game for Georgia State at 11, 48-37. And Malachi Brown leads the team with 15. Ja'Kai Newton, inefficient, but in double digits as well, also adding 9 rebounds. Malachi Brown, 5 rebounds, 4 assists. But the glaring number, if you're looking at the box score, well, a couple of them. 18 turnovers to just 9 assists. The 1 of 14 and 0 of 7 from the floor to end the game, and no field goals in the final 6:24. And second half field goal percentage for Arizona State, 53, 16 of 30 from the floor. So they took the lead at the break. They're shooting 6 of 12 from 3. Arizona State is 2 of 14. Arizona State really never got it going from 3, but they started pushing it inside, having a lot more success. Started turning the Panthers over, and that's where the game flipped. Still don't think you can be too discouraged, but I think my first takeaway, it's the same one kind of had after the Cincinnati game and the Presbyterian game kind of happened in conjunction with each other. The box score does not compute with the team that lost at home to Presbyterian. The box score does not compute with the team that got blown out on the road by Eastern Michigan. You lost to Eastern Michigan barely by less than the combined scores of you losing on the road to the Big 12 teams you faced. That
makes no sense.
Just no.
I will say there might be something to the fact that this team is improving. I know that like we're still talking about, what are they, 2 and 3? Something? No, 1 and 3 or something like that. 1 and 4.
1 and 4.
We're still talking about a team that is very underwater record-wise. You know, at the end of the day, they went on the road, you know, to Arizona, and they still lost by 13. Okay. I feel like we can say, and sorry, let me back up real fast. They did just allow their season high in points. You know, like objectively, that did happen.
They're through the power conference portion of their schedule, though, and the max points they gave up is 75.
I don't think that's bad.
They gave up 100 times 3 times, and granted, if you power ranked the power conference teams they played last 2 seasons, the 3 they played last year would all rank better than the 2 they played this year. But that is still about 25 plus points you did not give up this year than you did last year to those teams. Those teams aren't 25 points better than these Arizona State and Cincinnati teams on any given night. So
yeah, I absolutely agree with you.
A lot better. Got away from you with a pretty bad blip there when you give up a 20-1 run, but those just happened. Like that happens in basketball games, and it wasn't like that happened and then, you know, it was in the first half and the game got away from crazy, you know. This wasn't like that, the Georgia Southern Road game a couple years ago that, like, they just could not physically score a point in the first half of that game for, like, the first 15 minutes. Like, it snowballed, but it was a lighter snowballing and you were in a better position, and even after all of that, still had a chance to maybe come back and win. Like, obviously it didn't happen, but it really only got away from them in the final couple minutes. And, like, some really cheap turnovers, like inbounding in the final minute, pushed it. Like, I think Arizona State got 4 points in, like, 5 game seconds on some cheap turnovers in the backcourt that kind of pushed it out to where the final score ended up being. But, you know, you didn't like embarrass yourself. It didn't get outclassed. It's just like you got power conferenced in the second half there, and you're both not good against pressure, And you faced the best pressure you've seen this season. Arizona State had a nice thing working there.
There's that, and the other thing too, and I feel like I have to pay attention to this now because it's starting to get really stark. I know that they shot 40% from 3 in the second half. Arizona State did. But they only shot 5 shots. Like, they were 2 of 5. Like, yes, obviously 40% is a good percentage, but we're only talking about 2 made baskets. So then if you look at the first half, they only made 2 threes. They were 2 of 14 from downtown. And that's another game where Georgia State either... maybe it's the basketball gods just shining favor on them, but they truthfully are not allowing teams to shoot threes on them in a way that I don't know that other Coach Hayes teams have been this good at defending the three. And now, if I can play devil's advocate a little bit, in the same vein with Eastern Michigan, there was a track meet at the rim. Like that is how Eastern Michigan used that big second half run. That is how Arizona State was able to, score 41 points in the second half. They only took 5 threes because they took 25 other shots, and they were 16 of 30 from the floor in the second half. Like there's obviously something to that, but I feel like there are not going to be teams that are going to run directly at the rim as well as some of the teams Georgia State has faced so far this year.
Yeah, 14 to 25 on 2-pointers is that's a great clip. You would take that every time if you're Arizona State. Maybe you struggle to get that against some of the better Big 12 defenses, and so you certainly take the games where you can do that. That is where their advantage should be. And frankly, we're talking about Clash Peters not being there. We're talking about Christian Beam still kind of finding his flow at this level. Rim protection and just post defense is the weak point, or should be the weak point for this Georgia State defense and just this team as a whole. You don't have a lot back there, just in terms of numbers of bodies. And Dennis Scott is still out, so you don't have him. Anthony Eno and Joey Chappelle are not they're kind of tweeners. They're playing up a position than maybe what they normally would have to, just because of the way this team is constructed. You're maybe gonna have to find some answers there. I know Jonas has gone to his zone. I don't love that because sometimes it feels like he's just going to his zone just to go to his zone, and that's when they give up their best looks from 3. Because I just don't think that they're a great zone team. I mean, you got to commit to it like Ron Hunter did if you're going to do it. But I think they can test well on the threes, and I think the guys I just mentioned that maybe are not the best post defenders or not the most proven post defenders, getting bad matchups, especially in a game like this against Arizona State, they run out and close out well on shots. And they're lengthy, Chappelle and Eno, long defenders, different when you're a guard, having a guy like that jump in your face than if you're a 7-footer backing them down in the post. So I don't know that they can keep holding teams to where are we at right now is the season 5-game sample size. They're allowing, or I guess 4 games because this is just the Division I teams, 26.3% on threes, which is 38th in Division I. Some of that's going to be, shots will balance out, but even if you're shy of 30%, even if that only gets up to the 28-29%, that'll work. And that can be something you can hang your hat on. That can help you out. I mean, there's going to be some good teams shooting the 3 that you're going to face in non-conference and in conference play that if you've got that in your back pocket, that can certainly help you. And I also think only being -3 on glass in this one, and that's with Arizona State winning on the rebounds 22-13 in the second half, they hung in this one with what I was just saying about them having issues and not having a particularly deep or large front court. They were managing rebounding pretty well, and it's because you have Ja'Kai Newton doing his part with 9, Malachi getting 5, then you have Chappelle and Eno getting 7 and 6 respectively. You're finding a way with what you've got to get boards, and since it went so pear-shaped in the Eastern Michigan game, you have not gotten just erased with offensive rebounds like you did in game 1. So you've at least cleaned that up. And you played 2 power conference teams since that happened that could have easily done the same thing to you that happened in that game. So, like you say, it's weird because it's the numbers still don't back up that this is a much improved team, and the record doesn't back up that it's a much improved team. You're still seeking a win against a Division I opponent, but They have gotten better, and I do feel like still this is a good defensive team, especially relative to years past. And I think you're kind of hoping it's just like you get more nights where the threes are falling like they were against Arizona State. You shoot 36%, 50% in the first half, and then that gets you through some games rather than being a consistent good offensive team. But that's a formula that you can find your way to wins over the course of the season if you can keep it up. So interested to see what happens going forward this week. 3 games, all part in some way of the Cancun tournament that they're doing. This Friday, they go to South Dakota State, which is part of the tournament, but it's like the campus site version of it, so it's obviously not in Cancun yet. So not sure if there's that much of a... Like, I don't know if there's any bigger swap in venues than you're going from South Dakota to Cancun, Mexico in the space of a couple of days. Like, that is a pretty drastic shift, but Georgia State's going to have to get ready for it. So it's an arena either way, I guess, so it doesn't really matter, but just a funny little geographical thing that's going on.
But I mean, I feel like Georgia State specifically has not encountered any sort of change in temperature that's this drastic. Like, this is a very well, packed together conference. And yeah, there are a couple of places, like it snows in Boone, North Carolina.
Sure. Well, and throw in Arizona State, which they've come home since then. It's not like they're staying out, but you're bouncing from Arizona to South Dakota to Cancun. Like, we are getting all over the place with this.
Yeah, I don't know. That's just very... I love that quirk that they're going to go from South Dakota to Cancun like that. Cancun on 3.
Yeah, I think probably not, because the season can't be over in November for these guys. Can't go to Cancun yet. Can't stay in Cancun. South Dakota State, they're 3-2. They are team number 157 on KenPom. So Georgia State's right now at 303. I'm curious, going a little tangent here, which I guess what this podcast always is. KenPom does still shade in last year's results or like the preseason expectations for a good while, and he has a good reason. If you go to his site, he spells out the methodology. Georgia State is the 247th defensive efficiency team, given that. But if you look at their numbers, the defensive numbers are better than that, other than the offensive rebounding percentage allowed. I'm curious at one point that catches up, because if those numbers don't go anywhere, then I think you're going to start seeing this Georgia State defense start be projected as a better defense, and therefore I think that'll help the ratings a good bit. Now,
I think the issue is the lack of wins, and 2, it's the 3 games where they've allowed into the 70s. Like, because like you and I see that it is improved. We can watch the granular half, but I think it's one of those things where it's going to be something is going to have to catch up in a relatively significant way, like you said, before that number starts. And I don't think you're saying they're going to fall into the top 20 or anything like that. No, right. But like again, right now they're in the 270s, and I don't think this is a 270s type defense. I really don't.
247 even, so it's better than 270s. But the thing I was about to say, the offense is 330 out of 363 now in Division One. That one might not go anywhere, and the issue is, if you look at this, if you sort by offensive efficiency on KenPom, the teams that are in the bottom 50 in offensive efficiency, who are not like in the 300s overall or like the low 200s overall, like Marist, I forget what their number is, they have like the 47th best defense. So they have risen above because they are like that good on defense. The issue for this team, and what might cost them from still being a good team and might have their record sit around where it has the last 3 seasons, is they've got to be that good on defense if they're not going to be able to put it together on offense. And that certainly hasn't happened yet. There are just encouraging signs. The first thing I have on South Dakota State, the Jackrabbits, their most recent game was against Peru State. I didn't look up where this is, but that jumped off as kind of like, I don't know we're playing international teams here, or I don't know where Peru State is.
So I looked it up really fast. I don't know that you would ever guess this, but if you'd like a guess, because of the harken back to honestly, our March Madness stuff.
Yeah, honestly, I did not look this up. I I also don't know the mascot, but my only thing I think is like Minnesota because it's a nearby state. But
okay, so you're right side of the country. They're the Bobcats, but I will tell you, it is Nebraska. So
oh, there you go.
You know, like I kind of, I don't want to say you nailed it, but like you certainly got closer than I would have gotten.
I would certainly hope that like Peru State in California is not busing over to Brookings, South Dakota for like one random game. I figured it had to be some kind of reasonable travel, but the Peru State Bobcats, there you go. That's one of the 3 wins. They're 3-2. We're talking about how turnovers have been a struggle for Georgia State. This is not a great team at forcing turnovers, are the Jackrabbits. So you look at this as maybe your opportunity to clean it up. If you look at just like they don't have great steal numbers, they don't force a ton of turnovers. This might not be the week. This might not be the game where you're going to be shrouded with full court pressure, and so maybe you take advantage of that, or maybe it's not effective, whatever the case might be. Haven't done a lot of film studying there on South Dakota State, but this is one on paper that if we're talking next time we speak and it's like another 15, 16 turnovers, it's a problem because that's not been what this team's MO has been, even as they've been winning games and playing pretty well. They are leaning more on their offense, but they're a pretty balanced team overall. Don't allow a ton of offensive rebounds. And neither the 2-point or the 3-point shooting numbers stand out to you all that much, but it hasn't stopped them from being a pretty productive team to start the season. So it's a team that you're just going to be ready to defend against. They a little bit turnover prone themselves, so maybe you take advantage of that. But this is the only road game of this set of games because the other 2 are obviously neutral site in Cancun. So as it's been well established with Jonas Hayes' teams, struggled to win on the road. So this would certainly be the one that would maybe convince people most something is happening because this is going to be the most hostile environment in your face. And this is a solid mid-major program that has been in it in the Summit League more years than it hasn't over the last decade. So this is certainly like the type of programs that 5 years ago, Georgia State would have held themselves in the same category as. And so this is an opportunity. And so see what you can do. And like I say, maybe delay talking about turnovers for at least one episode. At least one half episode, whenever we get to this, whether it's on the post-game show or whatever.
Yeah. No, that would be good. And I think, one thing that's going for South Dakota State is they have, obviously everybody's played only 4 or 5 games, and the 46 that they allowed to our Peru State Bobcats is certainly keeping their numbers relatively low. But for right now, of the 9 teams in the Summit League, they allow the fewest points per game at 72.8. We'll round that up to 73. That's a very good number, relative to the rest of the league. And there's some pretty high numbers in this league. On the other side, sorry, I had that backwards. Excuse me. They allow 64 points a game. Excuse me. So now you can probably guess where this is going. On the other side, they score the worst in this league at 72.8 points per game. That's an opportunity for Georgia State. I know that they have not, they certainly have not hit 70 points this year against, competition like this, and I absolutely understand that. And it'd be a task for them to be able to, overcome some of their offensive struggles, pending guys in the lineup, for health and otherwise. This is still an opportunity for them to put points on the board, find a way to not turn the ball over as often as you can, and stop fouling. I don't even say that as like I'm upset about what the fouls are. I just think that, finding a way to play better defense and keep guys in front of you, or just find a way to not impact guys when they're going towards the best. Because I feel like Georgia State gets called for just it's always in bunches, and that's the frustrating part. So it's never something to really focus in on. But I feel like once they get that like 3rd foul in the second half of like every game, then the other team is in the bonus in like 5 minutes of like real time, not even clock time. So finding a way to minimize the fouls and, continue to show us what you can from, defending the 3. I mean, if this is an offense that is not, prolific and can't score a ton, there's an opportunity there for you to try to emulate Marist and be a top defense in the country and try to steal a game, on the road. And I'm going to say this is a tough game, not because this is the most tough opponent, but I mean, have you ever been to South Dakota? Have you flown from Atlanta to South Dakota? I feel like, for a student athlete, that's not exactly the easiest thing to do, even if it's on a Friday. So, they're definitely things that they'll have to consider when it comes to, getting their legs underneath them after the travel day. So, but I think there's an opportunity here. I don't know that I would say I think they'll win because, unfortunately they have not been given the benefit of the doubt, but I feel like if they play at least similar to how they played against Arizona State, then I like some of their chances.
Yeah, I mean, the only realistic comparable sample size you have is the EMU game, and you just kind of have to assume that you have to hope it's an anomaly. I guess you can't assume it is, but that's the only other road mid-major game you played, and it didn't go well. And then you lost at home against Presbyterian, so it is hard to know what they've done, what they put together that's going to lead to them being able to stack some wins. But there's traits we've seen through the first 5 games, even in 4 of them being losses, that you're hoping that they can improve on and continue to lean on. And kind of like you say, this being a team that maybe is also leaning on defense, if it is going to be more low scoring, and this isn't going to be a game they're going to have to keep up scores in the 70s and the 80s, I think that every one of those matchups should be an advantage because on paper, that's the type of game they want to play, and they want to play a lower tempo along those same lines. So I guess we'll see, and I think it probably makes sense just to, if we can throw it in at the end on the post-game show, whatever form that takes. Travel abiding on one of our fronts this weekend, but we'll recap that one and then rope in the Cancun games over the weekend as a little appendix to the post-game show on the football side. But part 1 of this is your actual road game, and we'll see how they handle it. I mean, I think it's easy for us to say to people listening to this, don't go in with expectations, because I don't think anyone has expectations about this team, but I'm just curious what we've seen for the first 5 games that they can keep building on, because it hasn't been something that they've done well in past seasons, but this is the backs against the wall season, so we'll see if they're able to, if this is 4th time lucky.
And the other, it goes without saying, but I'm going to keep saying it. I would feel worse about this team if we didn't have some question marks, I don't know that we can just gloss over the fact that Jelani Hamilton has only played 3 games, and that's a guy that you brought back this year. You're expecting to be, maybe not literally the top scorer, but you're expecting him to give you, some really good minutes and some really good production. So I'm not saying that him specifically on the court is the difference maker, but is it crazy to suggest that 13 extra points from Hamilton makes that Arizona game not over, in perpetuity? Maybe it's a little bit closer. We don't know how. He could have had a terrible shooting night that night, but the point is if this is how they look, and if they're starting to show us some little glimpses of improvement, even with the lineup not being fully healthy, that I hate to use the word encouraging because, again, don't deserve the benefit of the doubt, but, could be encouraged by some things moving forward. Just throwing that out there.
You don't want to use the word excuse, but when they were losing these type of games last non-conference or the one before that, it was full strength Georgia State. This is who they were. There's at least something you can point to that is going to theoretically get better about this team. Still not exactly sure on the timing with Jelani. The word that he used was cautious. When we spoke after the Fort Valley game when he didn't play, it didn't seem like season-ending type territory, but I do think Dennis Scott is probably closer. It sounded like he participated in shoot-around before the Arizona State game, and both of them have been traveling. So I guess he said 1 to 2 weeks on Dennis, so possibly as soon as this game, maybe the Cancun games, we see him back in the lineup, back in the rotation. I guess we'll wait to see on that, but that one seemed closer to being he's going to be back ready to go and filling in, and they need all the bodies they can get in the front court, and so that certainly will be a help. We'll see if it's this game. We'll see if it's the ones coming forward in Mexico. But for now, we'll leave the men's stuff. We'll come back to it the weekend after the football. Women's basketball goes 0-2, as I said at the top, but I think either game you can feel particularly too down about. They lose 90-89 in overtime at Furman. I think it's a game that they could have had. They certainly had opportunities. They're up in the final seconds of regulation, foul a Furman shooter who ties the game at the line, sends it to overtime. And I don't think Gene Fowl loved the foul call or there being time left on the clock for the foul call, and so controversy there. But ultimately not able to do it in overtime against the Paladins. So certainly of the two, you want to have won that one, especially because you forced, again, these are becoming normal for me. 32 Furman turnovers in the game, and only 2 of those were in overtime. So it's not like it's a super inflated stat by the fact that you had 5 extra game minutes. And then a tight one, you lose at Auburn this past Monday, 69-65. Never really got out of hand. Auburn's biggest lead was 11 in the third quarter, and Georgia State ended up taking a lead less than 3 minutes, or a little over 3 minutes in the game after that. They went on a 12-0 run after being down 37-26. But Auburn better down the stretch. Georgia State goes into the fourth quarter trailing by 7 and can only make up the difference by 3, outscoring the Tigers 21-18 in the fourth quarter. And so despite Kaylee Addy and Crystal Henderson both scoring 18, it's not enough, but unlike the Mississippi State game, where one quarter got out of hand, hung around in this one, just couldn't get it done. So 2-3, but certainly a different caliber of losing record than what we were talking about with the men's team.
Yeah, and I think this weekend was really emblematic of what we said last week about the women's team. You know, we know that Crystal Henderson is going to be great. You know, I think if it's a shock that she was third in scoring versus Furman, you know. But then you look at it and it's like, okay, Morgan Robinson, Wegu, 25 points, 7 of 13 from the field, 10 of 12 from the line. I think Georgia State, they shot for the free throws really well this weekend. And it's so hard to be broken up about a 1-point loss. It's one of those, like, you had it, you even held Furman to no field goals to end the game. But, they just ended up hitting a free throw and you didn't, that's really the determining factor of, this one. So I'm not even too broken up about it. Obviously, it would have been great to get that win. It would have been great to get that win against Auburn. Definitely some things to clean up because, like the men committing too many turnovers, but still forcing a good bit of turnovers themselves. I mean, Auburn had a 17-10 turnover to assist ratio in their home arena. That's a really good game defensively for Georgia State. Last year, Georgia State probably gets out rebounded by like 20 or 30 in this game. This year, only by 11.
Well, might still that's still a concern because the Furman game, they're out rebounded 59-37. Not the first time they faced kind of a cataclysmic difference there on the glass. So, an issue for this team, and like certainly the one stat you can point to based on the season so far and say, like, this is what might cost you more often than not if it keeps being this kind of glaring of a problem. But you turn around this week, you host Thanksgiving tournament, which the perks of a home tournament is you've got 3 games in a row this week, all in your own arena. Playing Stony Brook on Monday, playing Samford on Tuesday, playing Central Arkansas on Wednesday. And I should say, believe Samford is the Tuesday game for the men as well in Cancun. I can't imagine there's that many instances of the same Division I program, men's and women's, both playing the same team that's not a conference opponent in different MTEs on the same day. That's very odd.
I feel like this happened. The only thing that might get me is I don't think it was an MTE. But I believe...
Well, yeah, it does. I guess it doesn't have to be an MTE. It could be the same day.
I think Georgia State played the same school 2 years ago in non-con, but I'm like blanking on who
on the same day.
And I think that's the other thing that'll trip me up. It might not have been the same day, but it was like Thursday, Friday, or something like that.
Strange fortunes, because obviously there's no way this would have been scheduled at all.
Not at all. Yeah, that's such a weird totally coincidence. Separately.
But yeah. Sandwich spot. They play Samford in between Stony Brook and Central Arkansas. I'm going off of Torvik's rankings for women's basketball because KenPom doesn't have women's rankings, but give the Panthers a 51% chance of beating Stony Brook, 64% chance of beating Samford, and then a 45% chance of beating Central Arkansas, who is 192 in the Torvik rankings. So 2-1, I think, would be solid. 3-0 obviously would be a boon, and you'd exit that week going to 5-3 overall, avoiding staying at or below 500. So it certainly would be a win. The other note here is, unfortunately, the hopes of continuing the Power Conference winning streak going this season rest on now going to Miami in the middle of in the middle of December even, and winning there. Obviously, you win at Clemson and Georgia in years past. Had a chance against Auburn, but coming up short there might mean that the streak ends because Miami's got a good team. But I guess we'll see down the line what that leads to. But I don't usually love the home tournament. Like when Georgia State's men's had been doing the home tournament the first couple years Jonas was here, I didn't love that. But I think it's worked out for Georgia State's women. They do the same. And I think it'll help them at this moment when they could use some good quality games, but at home maybe get a chance to get above 500. Feels like it's coming at a good time for them over the Thanksgiving week.
Yeah, finding a way to be in your own bed over that stretch of time, specifically the holiday week, that's never a bad thing.
So, men are in Cancun, which probably does sound better than Atlanta, Georgia in November, but the women have their tournament in the home confines of the Convocation Center this week as well. When we are back, next main pod, we will break down those MTE games for both the men's and the women's basketball teams. But for now, we will leave the round ball and go to the pigskin. 41 minutes, probably the latest we've talked about football. But I think it's good because there's been a lot of basketball to talk about. And it's not... I think we just got through a long discussion on basketball that wasn't as doom and gloomy as maybe you would think given Georgia State's men's 1-4, the women's team's 2-3. I think we found... And not even in a way like we were trying to find the positives, but just like a good intellectual discussion on basketball, kind of talking through the strengths and weaknesses, and hopefully helpful to you at home. I imagine if you're listening to this much Georgia State sports talk, you're looking for not just the doom and gloom. So hopefully we provided that for you. Georgia State football, with no transition here, doom and gloom. They're 1-9. They are not going to play at home again the rest of the season. They've got 2 more games. That is all they're going to play is 2 more games, and it starts with a trip to Troy this Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern on ESPN+. Trojans are 6-4. They are coming off a 33-0 drubbing at the hands of ODU on Thursday on national TV last week, so they will certainly come into this one hungry. And I know in the preseason I talked about this as this is Jared Parker's second year, just like it is Dale McGee's second year, and so this might be an interesting... Both the teams needed to get to a bowl game, or just kind of a good idea of sizing up where these programs are in year 2 of these respective new coaches. And certainly it is going better for Coach Parker over in Troy, Alabama. And they have a chance to still, slim chance to win the Sun Belt West, but it requires them winning out, and certainly as they are 11.5-point favorites, probably their fans like their chances of keeping that going. And the best thing we can say, Cameron Brown should be good to go. All the noise from Coach McGee during the week was that it was good. He was progressing, and this week, tonight, as we record this podcast, the availability report came out, and he was not even listed. So all signs are go for Cameron Brown being back after 1.5 weeks hiatus for playing quarterback from Georgia State.
Which is good, because the offense certainly did not look as crisp last week as it had, and it definitely felt like the offense had turned a corner. I have a bone to pick with Troy, and maybe this is a more off-season type discussion, but I'm going to say it now anyways, because I do think it's topical. To your point about the 2 coaches who are in their second year, Troy frustrates me as a Georgia State alum, simply because Troy has kind of done the thing that I think that Georgia State can do, which is, float in a lot of the years, consistently be a bowl team, even if you've got some pretty big questions coming into the season. But, you do something very good. And, some years you're elite at it nationally, but most of the time you're just solid in it. One year you'll have your pop 10, 12 win season or whatever, go to your conference championship game, win it, and then your coach leaves for greener pastures. You obviously take the step back. And now Troy is a bowl eligible team in the next year. Everybody thought that they would be, pretty bad this year. And like you said, they went out and like they have a shot to go to the Sun Belt Championship game. They'll need Arkansas State to lose, but like that's...
And Southern Miss, I think, to lose out, which would include they need to beat Southern Miss next weekend.
Right.
So...
but that's like Georgia State has not been in this position where.
So you're saying it's jealousy?
Yes, absolutely.
There's nothing wrong with that. That is a very
100%.
common phenomenon in the world of sports. But I get that for sure. And they did reach the heights. John Summerall leads them to back-to-back Sun Belt titles. Now at Tulane, probably about to be somewhere else to be determined. But a high riser in the sport. And even though they drop off last year. It's only going to be a 1-year lapse for them not making a bowl game. Opportunities to win the conference, or at least win the division. Understandable how you feel. And
can I just like tie the point home really fast? And I think the thing that frustrates me the most is, stop me if you've heard this before, Brady. When looking at this Troy team, you have a team that is up there in the Sun Belt in defense allowed. I think they're third in points allowed in the conference right now at like 23 a game. Very good.
25 exactly.
Yeah, very solid number, right? And then it's an offense that like doesn't really do a whole lot of anything well. They don't score a lot. They are medium at passing. They don't, you're not putting up crazy rushing numbers. But here they are again. Troy with an opportunity to go to the Sun Belt title game, they'd still need help, but like, it's the same Troy. It's the same Troy that it's been, and like that is what's frustrating to me about this game, because if you told me coming into the season, like these two teams would line up and they would feel this way going into this game, I would be really shocked. Like, wow, Georgia State only has one win. That I know the schedule is tough. That's a little surprising, but I mean, like, I could copy-paste what I just said in the podcast and paste that to every single Troy-Georgia State game since we started doing this. And
well,
I know they don't play
not the 2021 one.
Sorry, yes. They
smoked them in that one. They had just fired their coach. It was the interim coach. Georgia State was rolling at the end of 2021. Georgia State's actually winners of 3 straight in this one.
Yeah.
3 of the last 4. They are evening the series, and this will be an opportunity to keep doing that if they're able to pull up the road upset here. Yeah, they're 11th in scoring offensively, 24.3 points a game. The moral here is, if you have a good defense, you can cover up a lot. Like, if you have an ability to keep the other team from scoring a lot of points, that is your ticket to winning games. Because their offense is better than Georgia State's, who is 13th in that category, 20.8 points a game. But their defense is substantially better than Georgia State's is, and that has allowed them to... They're 3-0 in one-score games. There's not that much of a line to draw between you have a good defense, and when it's tight games, you need to stop, you're able to get it. Like you mentioned, 9th in rushing offense, 180 yards a game, so that's rushing defense. So not a great number, not a terrible number, certainly better than Georgia State's number. And 4th in passing defense, 191.2. You'd certainly take that week in, week out. And so that'll be the test for Georgia State is, I think you size this one up on the field, is that you get Cameron Brown back. You need him to be a rusher. You need Jordan Simmons to be involved, because this is not going to be easy opportunities through the air. It's been a solid Troy defense against the pass. And they've forced 13 turnovers as a defense. Pretty solid number. So certainly that is 10 more than Georgia State's defense face. So grading on a curve, it is outstanding. Yeah, I have a few things written down here as far as things I'm circling, but I'll let you kind of walk through what you're seeing with this game. As Troy, like I say, might be a bit angry coming in this one. Getting shut out. I think they allowed 9 sacks last week. Like, the offense is going to want to show something, and they're going to see Georgia State's numbers and think that they're going to have an opportunity to have success.
And it's Senior Day. I feel like Georgia State has played Troy on Senior Day several times over the years. I want to say 20...
I think you went to one of them.
Yeah, those would say, I think 2015.
2016?
Yeah, 2016, thank you.
Because I wasn't there. I had graduated already, but I remember the band did go to the Troy game in 2016.
Yeah. I definitely remember seeing it in person. And I want to say there was another one that was talked about like after then, but regardless, I would not shock me if Troy comes out in this game and has a ton of juice. And I mean, we've seen Georgia State get down early in games, and I think South Alabama was the only game that they really kind of fought back after, fought back to completion. Obviously they lost.
But. App State, they fought back, but it was kind of in the sense of you're already down 31, so it wasn't going to happen.
Right, exactly. And that's kind of where you got to look at this Troy team. I mean, how do you pronounce Tucker's last name? That's great. I just wrote Tucker down. Kilchris?
Yeah, so I believe we are back on the Goose Crowder train.
Okay.
So the chronology, as I understand it, Goose Crowder gets hurt in the Memphis game earlier in the season, which is the second straight year he has been hurt in the Memphis game. Last year it was for the season. So it's on site with the Tigers for him. Tucker Kilcrease comes in at that point. He is now hurt. He got hurt in the ODU game, but Goose Crowder returned in that game. It was a little 2-quarterback system, so I believe it is back to 1 quarterback, and it will be Goose Crowder. But as you say, pretty big variation in the passing attack, because against Memphis, when Kilcrease was kind of forced into action, it was like I think they got a little bit better in the final drive, but a very low passing total in that one. But then they leaned on their passing game for some wins later in the year. So he certainly got it going, but now it's Goose Crowder again. But that's their original starter, so he's finding his sea legs again after being injured for a good bit of time, but you certainly have to expect him to want to put out a better product than when he came back in the game last week, and he was their starter coming in the year, so you certainly have to expect some quality there because he was top of the depth chart for them.
And, last week they had 98 passing. Crowder had 98 passing yards. Their leading rusher had 16 rushing yards. Just not a great day for the offense at all. Obviously they didn't score. But there's definitely, we saw Georgia State for most of the year use a 2-quarterback system. We saw how that was a drive-to-drive thing. The offense had no synergy. I would be shocked if Troy came out this week and looked as flat on offense with the extra week, the more time to prepare. Crowder, like you said, getting his sea legs underneath him. It's definitely going to be a better offense, and that is probably trouble for Georgia State just because, their defense hasn't been able to stop anybody in the last couple of weeks. So,
yeah, of the games in recent memory, this is the one you look at as most probable to be lower scoring. The best odds they've had of holding a team in the Sun Belt Conference under 30 points since the one time they did it against James Madison. And I think that's going to start with managing the run game because that's been a struggle for them. Even if it's been kind of by attrition, they've given up yards over the course of these games. Troy has had 100 rushing yards or less in 5 of the last 6. So if they're having success on the ground, especially if you're expecting improved performance through the air with Goose Crowder having another week ready to go, that would be concern on the defensive side of the ball. Part and parcel of that, we're broken records on this for sure. We just keep bringing it up because it's just to say we're stuck at 3, that the toggle is not going up. You got to force takeaway. That's going to certainly be a story in this game. Troy is a 0 turnover margin because they've forced 13 and given it away 13 times. So that's at least a clip that they are willing to if the opportunities present themselves. And part of it is they've given up 43 sacks, which is 18 more sacks than any other Sun Belt team is allowed. So that is your opportunity in this one, is if you can keep the run game in check, and if you're able to get them off the field by way of getting a turnover, the thing the defenses pride themselves on so much, that could certainly help you out. And then flipping into the other side, just down to down, I don't think you can expect a lot of success because Troy's, even against Clemson, they held Clemson in check, which that's still an ACC team, and hey, look, they're finding it. Dabo is the speech if they end the year 8-5 in a bowl win with the 4 straight wins to end the season is going to be much must-watch cinema. But Troy had them bottled up for a good portion of that game. You're gonna have to keep hitting explosives. Maybe you don't get another 92-yard touchdown run from Jordan Simmons, but you got Ted Hurst. Hit him for at least a long pass play here or there. Maybe Cameron Brown gets a loose for a running play. That's kind of where I'm looking at, is like you hit an explosive here or there, you force a key takeaway, and you find your way to win some kind of like 24-17 type game, 21-17. I think, ironically, if it were playing out in the 30s, I might like Georgia State more, just because I feel like that the big play and potential there feels more up their scene. But it's hard for me to see them getting into the 30s on this defense until I see it. So that's not what I'm expecting. And so that's why I say it might be that, like, very inefficient offense, but you hit 170 yarder to get in the end zone or set up a short field and getting a touchdown that way might have to be the ticket in this one. And that's just to say they're 11.5 underdogs for a reason. And so it's going to be a tough lift on the road, and we don't really know where they're at as far as approaching this game mentality-wise, but at least having Brown back should help as far as this being the best version of the offense. And if you're looking for the explosiveness and like the variety of the run game, he helps you out there as well.
It certainly does. And, one thing, if you're going to try to emulate ODU, or I should say, Troy was fortunate that was only a 33-0 game, because there were 3 ODU punts, and then there were 3 drives where ODU was turned over on downs. But on 2 of those drives, ODU moved the ball more than 50 yards. They just couldn't complete the drive. And yes, we've seen Georgia State do that. I'm not going to sit here and tell you otherwise. But I kind of agree with your point about 30 points. Like, if Georgia State is in a shootout, I kind of like their offense to be better simply because of how I think Georgia State can move the ball, especially if Cam Brown is back. He's going to have to use his legs. He's going to have to, find some way to be a 1-2 punch with Jordan Simmons. And that has been successful so far since we've seen it come to fruition at the end of this season. I hate that it's taken so long for that to happen. And yes, there have been, other defensive issues that has, prevented Georgia State from winning with that tandem intel, but baby steps are still baby steps, and if those two are working like we think they can, throw in Ted Hurst, and I think Georgia State does at least have an opportunity here.
Yeah, and in the event it's like a game in the 30s, you're kind of assuming that maybe Troy doesn't have the best day defensively, and that's what you're banking on. Like, on paper, this Georgia State team is not set up to put them under strain, so you're kind of assuming, maybe they miss a tackle and Ted gets free for a long one, and that kind of sets the tone early and Georgia State gets comfortable. It's not really based on what we're seeing in the stat sheets and kind of what we've seen from Georgia State so far. It's kind of like we're trying to map out a path to victory, and I think probably you're going to have to find a way to just win on the margins and have it be more low scoring. But if you're able to make it a shootout, I feel like it does favor you more than it does Troy, which is weird to say about this offense, but it's honestly just because on a slightest edge, it has been the better of the 2 units because the defense is the worst in FBS. So that's kind of how it goes.
There's been any improvement at all from it. And that is like, I know that the improvement has been relatively significant for the offense, but that is where we're at right now with the 2 units.
And I mean, Brown hasn't played since the first half against Coastal. As far as we know, been progressing well, but there is the piece of it where it's like, is there any game rust there? We'll have to see. You'll have to see. It wasn't a leg injury, so he should be fine. Like, he should be himself if he's clear, ready to go. It shouldn't affect his ability to go out there and do what he was doing before he was out of the game against Coastal. So, kind of have to just see how he looks, but I guess I'm not really that worried about it if he's been ready to go. Like, if he's been practicing this week, certainly I think should see more of the same, which is to say the offense was trending in the right direction until this last game against Marshall when he didn't play. And that does bring us to the other portion of this. Kind of a footnote as far as the season goes, because I think once Cameron Brown got cleared, it's kind of like, okay, well, Cameron's going to start again. But following on from reporting that publisher Ben Moore did over on our side, Panther Talk, TJ Finley no longer part of the program. Not been confirmed by Del McGee. I asked him about this because when I asked him about the plan at quarterback, should Cam not be able to go, his quote was about letting Christian Veyer take the helm. And that was the only player he mentioned. And so the follow-up was obviously, does that mean TJ's out of the equation? And the quote he gave was not about his status with the program, but it might as well have been, because what Del McGee said when asked about TJ not factoring in when he mentioned him earlier was, we're just going to make sure we coach the guys that want to help this team win and do things the right way. So almost would have been better for TJ's sake if he had just come out and said what we believe to be the case through the reporting that Ben has done. Like I said, it doesn't really... Once Cam was good, he was going to be his job again, and just kind of about like, okay, now the backup is someone else. But it's an unfortunate end of the chapter where it's like, this has kind of been the certain persona that a lot of people had. A lot of people firing off jokes about TJ Finley when he got eligibility and was playing for Georgia State. Certainly a lot of people in the fan base, out of the fan base, not really understanding the plan. But he was going out there, he was competing. But then something like this happens, and it confirms a lot of people's priors, and I think it's just an unfortunate way for it to end. And so, not a lot more to add there. It's kind of tacked it on at the end here, just because it wasn't really worth doing a whole discussion on, because really everyone's moving forward. But there will certainly be questions as we go into the offseason, and just trying to get the full accounting of the story of like why this even was the path they took. Because it seems like Cameron Brown was maybe a little bit late in kind of blossoming as a quarterback, and they really into fall camp when they realized he could probably be the starter for this team. But it just feels like just a misstep and a misread of the situation to feel they need to go out and add a guy and give him the starting job despite not playing in fall camp. It just didn't feel like any of this was set up to succeed for anyone. And I think we saw that with how inconsistent the offense looked when we were seeing the quarterback being managed that way.
You know, I don't even have a ton to comment about Finley specifically, but I will say this. The quarterback room for Georgia State this year has just been a clown fiesta. And I don't even mean that it wasn't a talented... This year? Fair. I don't even mean that it wasn't a talented room, because I think there was talent, but I mean, it's November 19th, and we're still talking about, crazy quarterbacking, and that's just been the MO this entire season. A lack of transparency, a lack of kind of understanding where people's heads are with it. And just now I had the thought about I guess this would have been the after 2020 season, like before 2021, when, we were doing all those things and thinking about, Quad Brown's going to be like a, 4-year starter at Georgia State. Like, since that moment, the quarterback position at Georgia State has had such a funny transformation, and I know Darren brought some stability to it, so I'm not going to sit here and say that, there wasn't any sort of stability, but I mean...
But that did bleed into the 2021 season.
Exactly.
He wasn't the starter in 2021, he just became the starter.
Exactly. It's not like he, started his career at Georgia State with some sort of, certainty that, this job is yours. Like, you're just the starting guy. No, he had to take the job in a, I don't want to say weird because it's relatively normal, but like I'm saying now, there just has not been stability out of Georgia State. And, for much of the 2010s, we saw them with a ton of stability at the quarterback position. Yeah.
At least once we got through the gory years, because it was Nick Arbuckle for 2 seasons, it was Connor Manning for 2 seasons, it was Dan Ellington for 2 seasons. And there were struggles mixed in there, but it was not because there was inconsistency at quarterback or a lack of understanding of who was leading the offense. And I think you certainly can't dismiss the fact that it was just that has kind of been a big symbol for the way that this team has struggled going 4-18 through 2 seasons, that Christian Veyer was kind of locked in as the quarterback to start the season last year until he wasn't, but we didn't know going into the game who was going to start. It was a big question. And so even, the first second there were struggles last year for Christian, it was kind of like, all right, is it Gibson time? And yes, it was. And then he didn't finish the season because he gets hurt, but so you don't really get any consistency there. You obviously don't get it this year. The only consistency has been inconsistency. And so, as we kind of talked about in previous pods, like, obviously job one is keeping Cam happy heading into year 2, but even in the event that he stays and he goes through the entirety of 2026 as the starter here, no snafus, no injuries, no anything, you would still be going back to Dan Ellington's last season. Well, I guess even you'd be going back to Connor Manning's last season, where you had the same quarterback make starts for the entirety of 2 straight seasons, because obviously Dan had his injury as well. So I guess Darren Granger did start every game in 2022, 2023, but he didn't having the job the entirety. It wasn't like once he got here and arrived, he was the guy. There was
Correct.
even some moving around there. So there is certainly something to the stability thing of you want to be able to establish some regular order at quarterback. And maybe you're not going to get that as much in this day and age in college football, but I think you can certainly aspire to at least 1 year in a row without any of the questions there. And so I think that's chief objective number one this offseason after another season that has gone poorly is like deciding on a quarterback, figuring out how to add depth around him that doesn't necessarily cloud the picture, but gives you options in case there's any injuries or whatever the case may be. Building out your younger guys as well and like feeling like maybe you have a guy on the roster you could trust in 2 years if you don't get someone in the portal. All of that feels like it's been a bit in flux. Some of it because of the way college football is nowadays, but some of it in ways where it's not being managed properly. And so kind of is where it is. Certainly, and I've said this offline a couple of times, I think that the portal window reducing to there being one portal window will save a lot of staffs from themselves of over-recruiting. And that you can't have this situation happen again where you're adding a guy in the summer because you can only make these portal additions back in December or January, whatever the day is. The day is always changing, whatever. But the point being, your roster is going to be more or less set at the end of this year, the start of next semester. So that I think will be a help because you can't do this again where you're muddying up the quarterback picture that you'd kind of had settled heading into spring practice and through spring practice afterwards. So I think that could be for the best.
And I think we feel so much better if it is Brown heading into next season than we did coming off of, how we felt about Veer. And I don't think, obviously Veer wasn't as good as we would have hoped last year, but I still think Brown right now has shown us more and has given us more to kind of project into 2026 than we kind of thought would happen going into this year with Christian Veer.
And especially if it's like he's our guy, this is what our offense is going to be, and maybe there's changes there, maybe there's not, but I think that you can have the offense more built around his identity, whereas obviously through the middle of this year, you were marrying two different ideas that just did not mesh well, and you can kind of remove that entirely from the equation, and you kind of need to, it doesn't really matter what a quarterback's good at in this day and age. Like obviously you see a lot more guys that are comfortable moving. What matters is the offense fits what they do well. And so if you have one guy and you have a idea after watching him play for this entire season of what Cameron Brown does well, you can make it so the offense is just going to keep putting in positions where he is having to do those things he does well and get the skill guys to complement that style of play. And so it helps you build out who you're going to add through the portal. It helps you decide on the scheme and the things that this team is going to lean on and make kind of their fundamentals, which is going to help those offensive players kind of gel together a lot easier through spring practice. It just all starts at the quarterback, which is the most cliche, obvious thing about the game of football, but I think we've lost that over the last couple of years, just seeing how this has been. It's not settled on a cohesive picture, and I think if you can keep him here, that can be your starting point of that being the case. And if Georgia State gets 12 games of Cam Brown next year as the starter, I'd feel a lot more comfortable with them winning more than 1 or 3 games or whatever it ends up being for this season.
Hey, the bar is go to a bowl game. It's been a couple of years, which feels crazy to suggest, but that's where they're at right now. So the bar is 6 wins. That's where we get to. So if you don't have anything else left to say about this game, we can transition to our
the only thing to say is I do there's a chance they could hang with a number, but I'm like I said last time, I'm not picking Georgia State to win this one.
No.
Probably not going to do it next week unless something drastic happens to this one. So I've got Troy winning this one to kick off the pick'em.
Absolutely. We'll redo last week just to catch everybody up to speed. Bad week for us. Tied 2-4. ODU ended up winning, and James Madison won, but every other result we unfortunately picked incorrectly. Georgia Southern beat Coastal. ULM dropped their game with South Alabama. Southern Miss was defeated by Texas State in the weirdest
weird
game
one
of the
there.
season.
Well, Braylon Braxton didn't play. If I had known he wasn't going to play, I wasn't watching that one that closely, I might have thought differently, but they got waxed. 41-14.
That was the weird part.
Not competitive, yeah.
I know that, Starter didn't play, but I didn't expect them to get destroyed. So, yeah, just another wonderful week in the belt. But moving to this week, we've got some non-con that's popping up this late into the season, thanks to the SEC and the Pac-12 rip. Arkansas State, we both have defeating Louisiana. South Carolina, we have beating Coastal Carolina. Not a typo like I thought it was. South Carolina is playing Coastal Carolina.
And I might have felt different about this one if Samar Collier gets hurt for Coastal Carolina. If they had their quarterback, South Carolina's in all kinds of hell right now. They blow a 30-3 lead at Texas A&M last weekend. Vibes are not great in Columbia, but not great in Conway either. So I think the Gamecocks will get it done here.
Probably. It might end up being like weirder than closer than it should be, but I also think
those buzzard Gamecocks that are already circling for Shane Beamer will pounce if they lose this one.
Oh, for sure. So our first split of the week, if not our only split of the week, actually, I think James Madison beats Washington State. Washington State might not necessarily be as down in the dumps as Oregon State is in the 2025 version of the Pac-12, but I also don't think that they're particularly great either. And they need this one because after this they have their... Oh, Jesus. This is... Having two conference games with the same team is so ridiculous.
Well, they lost the one on the road, so it's revenge time.
Exactly.
I think they can get that one.
I think so too. They need either this one against James Madison or the rivalry week rematch versus Oregon State to go to a bowl game, as they're 5-5 right now. So, but I don't think James Madison is going to really let up. I think right now the G5 spot is certainly up in the air based on some other things.
I think it's the American team. I think it pretty clearly spelled out that James Madison has to win out and get some help.
I agree with that. I think the help will come. So I think a convincing win here and then a convincing win versus Coastal and in the Sun Belt Championship game would help James Madison's case in a way that I don't know that the American will get, just because they've played a lot of like close games against each other, and maybe that'll be what gives the committee the thing. But I don't know. Obviously I'm not a James Madison fan, but they do seem to be peaking at the right time, especially after their drubbing last week against App State. So I'm honestly surprised that we haven't heard anything about that seat being hot. But I know they just changed their coach. So
yeah, this is a principal play for me. Going against the grain here, I think it's like a 13.5 point spread in favor of James Madison. First thing is, really sounds like Bob Chesney's interviewing a lot of different places. His name's popping up at UCLA. Very recently, he's popping up at Penn State. Just as a principle, when that starts happening, even in a game that a team is favored in, even a team that has handled their business so far this season, it just kind of, you see teams start taking inexplicable losses when that starts happening because coaches get distracted. They've had a lot on their plate. They're looking maybe to put together the next staff if they're leaving. That's a factor here. And I guess that's mainly the main part of it. It just feels like a spot. It just feels like James Madison feels inevitable. They've been piling up a lot of really impressive wins. Their name's getting floated for the college football playoff. And it feels like it's supposed to be the culmination building towards the playoff, and it doesn't feel like it's necessarily going to happen because I just think that the American team, whoever makes it out of as the champion, is probably going to have 2 losses at most, whoever it is, and going to have a lot more wins and have a better chance to build their resume from this point of who they're going to play. The teams up at the top, they're still going to play each other. I think Tulane's got someone else in the regular season that they play. North Texas, they would have a chance to beat Tulane, which would be a nice win if they're the ones who are going to the championship. Navy's in there as well, technically. I guess not technically. Navy just beat South Florida. They're certainly in there. So just kind of I've seen this before, and maybe a bit of a letdown given where the vibes are with the CFP stuff. I don't know. I could look really foolish on this one. Of all the ones I'm picking, I'm going out on a limb here for sure. But I feel it in my gut that this is going to be the spot where it's like all this is said about this being, Jam, you can win out and make it hard on the committee, and what if they just lose here and it's not really a question anymore? Plus, Wazoo barely lost to Ole Miss, barely lost to UVA. It's not like they haven't gone on the road and played really well against good teams this season.
That part is true. You're certainly not wrong about that part. I don't know. We'll see. Moving to the other games, we both have Marshall. There is another split. That's right. Full disclosure, I think ODU is a better team than Georgia Southern. I think the vibes for the Eagles are rancid, and I'm not going to, shed a tear about that. This is strictly trying to get back in the competition play.
Fair enough. And it's a home game for Georgia Southern.
Exactly. And they do some weird things at Paulson. I believe this one is at night.
It's like afternoonish, maybe.
Yeah,
so
not like
it will be night at some point.
Yes, they do some weird stuff. Oh no, in the morning. Excuse me, in
the morning
at 1 p.m. Eastern. So
okay,
but
if it gets night, it's gonna have gone super weird. So you you could be right.
But
yeah.
And then the rest, Southern Miss, Texas State, and Troy, we have rounding out the week. And it'll be a good week. There's definitely some exciting games for the Sun Belt. I mean, I feel like this is a year where the races are not over. But
James Madison is the East champion.
Yes.
Once Coastal lost to Georgia Southern last week, that race is done and dusted. It will be James Madison representing the East.
Yes.
No drama there.
Correct.
When there could have been. There could have been winner takes all next week, and Coastal had to go ruin it.
Those dang not Gamecocks, Chanticleers. But I feel like the West is at least interesting in a way that it hasn't been in a couple of years. So that is at least exciting. So.
And Texas State can absolutely going to get away with it.
They certainly are.
Started out the year very poor, couldn't get a win in Sun Belt play, and they're still likely going to make a bowl because they, at 4-6, have ULM this week. They have South Alabama next week. Very in front of them to just win their last two against two teams that are already not making a bowl game to get to 6 wins and save it after pretty rancid vibe season from them as well. But they can still get patered in the end, rubbing it in everyone else's face who is sitting at home, the Georgia State Panthers included.
I'm so interested in watching Texas State next year move over to the Pac-12 and just seeing how that transition goes, because this was probably one of the worst last seasons before moving up a conference like that I've seen in a while,
especially relative to expectations.
Right.
They were expected to be among the players in the West. Now it's been about staving off missing a bowl game. So certainly been an interesting journey. This podcast has been an interesting journey, rollicking into the 100 not 100 was that 77th minute? There we go. I figured out how math works in the end. That is we've been talking for a long time, little lack of concentration there, lack of mathing there, but if you have made it all the way here, you earn the merit badge for this week. Next week is going to be the last crossover pod, so that will certainly make it to where we're not going into the 77th minute much longer. But Georgia State going to be at Troy this week, going to finish out at Old Dominion. We'll be back with the post-game show to talk about how that game in Troy, Alabama goes this Saturday at 4 p.m. Tack on a little bit basketball talk. Format still being determined on this post-game show, the day and the release and everything. We've got stuff to work out behind the scenes of when that'll happen and who will be on it and everything, but still going to put something out. We are still chasing this season to the very death. We are going to be 11 of 12. We're going to be through 11 of 12 when Georgia State's game at Troy this Saturday concludes. Now this podcast is finally concluded and I can stop talking. Thank you for listening. We'll catch you next time on the Thursday Night Podcast.